Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unit 2 and Week 2 of Sustainability and the Future of Fashion. As always, when you see my photo on the lower right of a slide, that means you should click and listen to my lecture. Thank you, and I wish you a wonderful, safe, and healthy and happy week. And a sustainable one, too. So in Chapter 2, you're going to explore the history of sustainability and how in the last 200 years and from the Industrial Revolution onward, there have been attempts to tell the world that we are using up resources faster than they can replenish. So read about that, as well as in your groups, you will create a history of sustainability timeline that includes much of what's mentioned in Chapter 2 of our textbook, plus some textile and apparel manufacturing and fashion facts in there as well that you'll have to look up so that you can really see where we were, where we are, and then through the rest of the semester, we can talk about where we're going. And just as we are all interconnected, interconnected parts are what make a system. A system is an organized set of parts that create a whole. The parts are interconnected to achieve a goal, and a goal is made after a vision is made. Think of a set of parts that make up a whole. One example of a set of parts are these ingredients: flour, baking soda, eggs, vanilla, baking powder, salt, and sugar. That is a set of individual parts. But when they are put together in a system, they create a whole. What whole do they create? You're right, a cake. Let's move on to slide 6. Here are more systems that are connected. There's the respiratory system. There's the digestive system. There's our circulatory system, among many other systems that work within the body. And all those 8 systems work together so that we can live. When we consider systems, then we don't consider parts alone. A football team is even a system. Each player by themselves is not going to create the goal of winning and scoring. It's the system of all the players working together that is what helps them reach those goals. The same is with fashion. If we only consider the color of dye we are using and not consider that that dye needs to be rinsed into a water body that people in the community will be bathing in, perhaps, or getting water from, then we are not considering the systematic parts of the decisions we make in fashion or in any product development. Let's move on to slide 7. And just as the body has systems, our planet Earth has systems. We have 4 major systems: the lithosphere, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the biosphere. So you learned this probably in 6th grade or 7th grade science, but let's revisit it right now because fashion affects all the spheres. The first sphere and system of the Earth is the lithosphere. The lithosphere is the core of the Earth, the solid inner core and then the outer core, which is liquid. It's constantly in motion. The lithosphere are actually rocks and stones and big outcroppings and mountains. And the lithosphere is the source of oil, petroleum, gas, which are the fossil fuels. The lithosphere is also the source of all minerals and metals, which is called ore. In order for us to obtain the fossil fuels, the metal ore, and the minerals, is a process called extraction. We extract oil, for instance, which is a fossil fuel, from the lithosphere. So you ask, how does fashion affect the lithosphere? We must use fossil fuels, oil and gas and petroleum, to make polyesters. Well, that's made from petroleum. We also use fossil fuels for natural fibers in terms of powering our factories and our equipment, for natural and synthetics. Then we use fossil fuels to transport all of those to factories where they can be made, again, powered by fossil fuels, and so on and so forth. So metals and fossil fuels come from that lithosphere, and once we take them out, they cannot be put back in. So that's something for you to really know how important it is. Once you take something out of the lithosphere, it can never go back into that inner or outer core. And the lithosphere is a system that is constantly in motion, just like every other system that exists. Let's go on to the next Earth system on slide 9. The next Earth system is the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is the air. It's also always in motion, and it regulates and keeps constant the conditions so that we can live and all other species and beings can live on the planet. The troposphere and the stratosphere are the two layers of the atmosphere closest to Earth. And the troposphere is where all the clouds are. The ozone layer, which you have heard of, is the outermost part of the stratosphere. And when greenhouse gases get caught up in the atmosphere, most of them are inside the stratosphere and the troposphere, and realize that when we burn fossil fuels that we extracted from that first sphere, the lithosphere, they get trapped in the atmosphere. So there is a way that those two systems, of course, are connected. Let's move on to slide 10 and another sphere. The third sphere and system of the planet Earth is the hydrosphere. Hydro is Greek for water, and the hydrosphere is all the water in the planet, whether it's in a sea, a river, a lake, or an ocean, or a pond, or whether it's up in a cloud being stored there, which will come down in hail or rain or snow or sleet. It's all of the water above ground and underground. So there's groundwater, that's part of the hydrosphere, as well as the water that we see and swim in and drink. Water is a renewable resource, which is different than the resources that are stored in the lithosphere. And just like the lithosphere and just like the atmosphere, the hydrosphere and all water inside the hydrosphere is constantly in motion. This is all driven by the sun as well. So water gets absorbed into the clouds. The clouds move through the atmosphere and come down somewhere else on land or on another body of water. Read more in Margaret Robertson's book about this hydrosphere, as well as all the spheres, while we move on to slide 11 and the next sphere. Thank you. The fourth sphere and system of our Earth is the biosphere. And the biosphere is the place on Earth that all of life exists. including all organisms, all rocks, all air, and all water. So the three other spheres exist on the biosphere, as well as all organisms. So whether it's an amoeba, whether it's a blade of grass, whether it's a bumblebee, a worm, a dog, a cat, a tiger, an elephant, a monkey, a fly, a person, or a bacteria. It's all life, and it all exists with the other spheres on the biosphere. The systems of the Earth are driven by the sun. And in terms of the biosphere in particular, the sun helps organisms grow. It also, as does, of course, all the other spheres, and then the meat eaters and the plant eaters, or the carnivores and the herbivores, all do their jobs eating and passing through their own body systems back out onto the earth. So nature in and nature out, and it decomposes and feeds more nature. So it's a constant cycle in the system that's constantly going around and around and around. Everything in nature gets recycled. Nothing goes to waste. And I want you to know that nature and all of its resources are all sources for everything we make. Nature goes in and we make something. And then what goes out becomes waste in nature. So it's really important when something gets wasted that it is a natural resource that will decompose and help feed the next system. So within the systems of the biosphere, there are individual ecosystems. And the ecosystems are really the systems that keep going each individual being. So every living organism has an ecosystem, which is their physical environment and helps them interact and have relationships with other beings and their ecosystems. Inside of each ecosystem are various habitats for all of the different types of beings and the various communities. So a habitat is where an organism lives, and a niche is how it earns its living. These are all terms that may appear on the quiz, so please know those and read more about them in Margaret Robertson's textbook, Sustainability Principles and Practice, Chapter 3. And do realize that a system has many systems inside of it. So an ecosystem can have many habitats and smaller ecosystems and communities inside of it. And they are all connected. Everything in a system is connected, just like a web. And all life is made of connections and systems. And a whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. So a system is always stronger than its individual parts. And every part of the system needs every other part and relies on it. Ultimately, when we work towards learning about sustainability, we have to become systems thinkers and learn about systems, because sustainability is the study of systems and the realization that how we do anything and live in any system affects all other parts of the system. And systems thinking is a way of perceiving reality that considers the relationships, processes, and all interconnected parts of a unified whole. And understanding that everything on the planet is interconnected. So therefore, when we make a decision in our lives or in our industries, in our businesses, that everything else is connected to that decision, and we affect other systems. Let's say somebody tells you some bad news, and you wake up in a bad mood, and you say something mean to your brother because you're in a bad mood. That doesn't mean just that decision you heard affected you. Now you have affected your brother, who's now in a bad mood, and may scream out to your mother, who says, "What's that about?" And then that puts her in a bad day. So everything is connected, and that's the same way with fashion. If we decide to go for a cheaper button that is not made of wood, but instead is made of plastic to look like wood, that cheaper button, now all those people that are making and carving the buttons that were more expensive out of wood are out of work. And now the cheaper button factory, which let's say is in India, is made with plastics and chemicals to dye those plastic buttons to look like wood. And that's now going to pollute the air and the water and the soil of the communities that those people are living in that plastic wood button factory. And those are externalized costs. So when you change a button, you have to think of all of the interconnected parts, because that is systems thinking. Back to systems thinking, because everything is connected, just like I was talking about the button factory, we can't just fix one problem in isolation, because that one problem solution affects so many other spheres and systems. There's an expression in sustainability saying every solution creates another problem. So that's why if you don't think about systems, that happens. Every solution to a problem that affects one part of the system affects everything else. So that's what we have to think about. Traditional thinking is what has created this take, make, waste situation that we have in the linear economy. When we think about systems and we go circular, we go crisscross, we go all back and forth, that's more circular. And that is the opposite of linear and traditional thinking, and that is systems thinking. Sustainable thinkers are systems thinkers because they think of the three interconnected spheres of sustainability: the environmental, the economic, and the social, or the planet, the profit, and the people. Whichever you say, realize because they all overlap, they are all working together. And when you do one thing to the environment, you also affect the people in that environment and the economy of that environment. And those three pillars or spheres or dimensions of sustainability that you actually learned last week in week 1, when you consider all three spheres, you are thinking like a systems thinker. Fill in the blank here. Systems thinking allows us to look at blank as a nonlinear, complex, interconnected system that is always in motion. Domenica Peterson from the CFDA, who is also a friend of mine, said that. So if she's from the CFDA, what do you think the word is that should be filled in the blank? You're right if you said fashion, because when we use system thinking to look at fashion, then we realize that fashion is nonlinear, complex, and an interconnected system, always in motion and always changing. When we use systems thinking to implement initiatives and solutions and processes to work towards sustainability, then we get sustainable development. Read more about sustainable development in the next slide, as well as in Margaret Robertson's textbook. Here are solutions put in place in the fashion industry that definitely use systems thinking to work towards sustainability. So these are all working towards sustainable development. We have responsible wool working at the material level. We have Levi's working to go waterless in their jeans. Packaging implementations. Fashion Revolution working for laborers everywhere and making you think about who actually is making your clothing. When you think of the sewers, when you think of the weaving and the dyeing of the denim, when you think of the shipping and the flying and transporting all the goods, when you think of whether you're going to use organic or traditional or whether you're going to use synthetics, when you think of fitting and being more thoughtful in your design, and when you think of giving instructions so your customer knows how to take care of a garment and lower the impacts in the garment's life cycle after they purchase it, those are all working towards sustainable development. What else can you think of in fashion that works towards sustainable development? Think about it. Just as work in sustainability focuses on sustainable development and systems thinking, it also must focus on resiliency. We learned about resiliency in an earlier slide, and it's the capacity of a system to accommodate disturbance and to accommodate change and cope with that change so that its essential structure and qualities and characteristics remains exactly the same. I mean, they'll change a little bit, but for the most part, it still goes forward doing what its purpose is to do because it takes a beating, but it keeps on ticking. So, takes a licking, but it keeps on ticking. Excuse me, that's the Energizer Bunny. So, that's what we need to do in fashion is make it so that these systems are resilient and realize that what we do must work towards resiliency in the systems that we're affecting in terms of communities' water, soil, air, fossil fuels, and the people that are laboring for us in all the different parts on the supply chain. We want them to be resilient too. We don't want to harm them, which is what we have been doing, of course. So how can we work towards resiliency? Think about that. The reason that we need to work towards sustainability development now and apply systems thinking for solutions that work toward resiliency and longevity is because we are almost at Earth's carrying capacity. This is a term you learned in Chapter 1, but if we continue business as usual right now, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, also known as the IPCC, forecast with their modeling that we will reach Earth's carrying capacity before 2050 and reach overshoot. Overshoot is another term that you learned in Chapter 1, but we must avoid overshoot because that's when all of our demands as people on this Earth will exceed the regenerative capacities of the planet because we're using too many resources. So we must do everything we can to avoid overshoot. So think about how fashion companies affect the Earth's spheres. And other than buttons and other than dyes, how else do the activities that we use to produce the materials and the products affect all the Earth's spheres? You'll need to know that for the quiz. You'll have to give an example. So start thinking of it now, and I will see you next week in another narrated slideshow. Have a fossil fuel-free day.